Today I'm out in Arizona with this very dirty Subaru Solterra, and in this video I'm going to tell you about the top 10 things you should keep in mind before you put a Solterra on your shopping list. The first thing to know is that Subaru designed the Solterra to be more off-road capable than the average mainstream EV, and it's really obvious when you take a look at the design. We get 8.3 inches of ground clearance, identical motors front and rear, listed approach and departure angles, and a rated water fording capability of just under 20 inches. All of that is significantly ahead of pretty much any EV under $65,000 or $70,000. If you want to get more off-road capability than this, you're really looking at a Hummer, a Rivian, perhaps an F-150 Lightning, but you certainly won't find it in an ID.4 all-wheel drive or an Ioniq 5 or an EV6 or a Ford Mustang Mach-E. The Mustang Mach-E, its ground clearance is actually less than a regular two-door Mustang. The next thing to know is that the Solterra does not give us a front trunk, not even a pizza box storage area under here like we find in the Ioniq or the EV6. Now, personally, I don't find that to be a problem at all because it means that this vehicle is more efficiently packaged. When you take a look at the distance between the dashboard and the front of the vehicle, this is simply not as long as a Mach-E. And it's no real mystery where the Mach-E's front trunk comes from. It comes from that really long hood profile that makes the Mach-E look gorgeous and look like a Mustang, but it's not overly space efficient. In the back, we actually get more cargo room than we have in the Mach-E, although I wouldn't have minded a small storage compartment for something like a Tesla Tap or an EVSE under the hood. This may not have a front trunk, but it does have a pretty large cargo area behind the optional power hatch. Just over 30 cubic feet of back here puts this ahead of the Mach-E. There's also a little bit of storage space under the load floor, but you won't find a spare tire in any trim. Here are the basic specs you need to know. Range should come in just over 220 miles. The official EPA score wasn't done in time for shooting this video, so it's just going to be up there on the side of your screen, one of those two sides or another. The battery on board is just over 72 kilowatt hours. The two motors together produce 218 horsepower, and charging happens behind this door right here. I love the fact that this is a metal door, not a plastic door, so it feels a little bit more substantial. Behind that door, we find a J1772 charge port and the CCS DC fast charge connector. Key thing to know, this is not going to DC fast charge as quickly as some of the modern crop of EVs that it's competing with. 100 kW is the fastest charge rate that this vehicle will support at the moment. That means that if you want to go from 10% to 80% charge, it's going to take nearly an hour in this vehicle, 53 minutes according to the specification. The onboard J1772 AC charger, that one's rated for 6.6 kW. The interior design is very futuristic, but rather unfortunately, there is no glove compartment on the passenger side. Initially, I thought that wasn't too much of a problem, but it does beg the question, where do you put your insurance and registration information? The interior is very futuristic and definitely a style statement. It also shares an awful lot of components with the Toyota BZ4X. Now, personally, I don't think that's a problem, but if you really love the way Subaru interiors look, you might not quite feel at home in here. Whether you get the base 8-inch infotainment system or this optional 12-inch infotainment system, the screens and the software are shared with Toyota and Lexus models. That means that we have online connected navigation in this vehicle. If you're a little bit further off the beaten path and you don't have an internet connection, you're not going to be able to navigate anywhere. On the other hand, it does support wireless CarPlay, wireless Android Auto, the app connection for your smartphone, and the smartphone integration goes full screen there, which is a really nice touch. Also really nice, the buttons and switchgear in here have a really premium feel. I think these actually feel nicer than in pretty much every other Subaru model. The toggles here for the dual zone climate control have a nice solid feel to them, so does the power button and the drive mode and X mode buttons down here as well. We have a Qi wireless charging mat available right there under that cover, and the most controversial design feature is over here on the driver's side, where we find this really, I guess, eccentrically shaped steering wheel, steering column, and instrument cluster. Here's what's going on. Over on the driver's side, it's designed for you to sit with the steering wheel in this position. So the instrument cluster sort of is somewhere between a regular instrument cluster and a heads-up display. Lots of information is provided by the LCD over there on the left side. This is approximately 7 inches or so in size. You can also collapse that left-hand menu and get just the speedometer right there in the middle. One odd touch, it never will show you a battery percentage, just a range icon. But you can see that there is this very large plastic surround here and this very eccentrically shaped steering column. You can see how the steering wheel rotates right there around that column. And then if I pull the steering wheel out, you can see the view from the passenger side. Only thing to keep in mind is you are viewing the sort of little plastic accordion section right there that does somewhat disrupt the angles that I think Subaru was going for in terms of this design. But as you pan around, you can really see how dramatic this dashboard is with the fabric inserts, the really, really thin dashboard design with no glove box over there, the big screen in the middle, etc. Also pretty eccentric are the buttons on the steering wheel itself. On this side, we have the cruise control button, standard radar adaptive cruise control, track forward, backward, and then mode selection. Then on the other side of the steering wheel, voice command controls for that multifunction LCD cluster, and then a toggle for the volume. Rear seat room is definitely generous. Now, unfortunately, Subaru didn't have any rear seat numbers to share with me just yet, but with this front seat comfortably adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, you can see I have nearly a foot of legroom left. The seat bottom cushion is pretty close to the floor. Adults might find that a little bit too low. Children will likely find it a bit more comfortable. And speaking of children, this is the kind of EV where there is definitely enough room back here for a rear-facing child seat. So definitely a big and accommodating rear seat. We also have USB charge-only ports, heated rear seats, air vents right down there in the middle as well. This rear seat has a two-step recline mechanism to it, but if I put it in its more reclined position, then my head does hit the ceiling. The fact that a high percentage of Subaru owners live in Colorado, the Pacific Northwest, and the Northeast absolutely did not escape the Subaru design team, and that's why they designed a number of cold weather features into the Solterra. The first one, of course, is the 8.3 inches of ground clearance. The second one is the software for the traction control system that has a snow mode to make it more aggressive at biting into snow. And the third thing is what they chose to do with cabin and battery heating. This has a heat pump, something that we don't find on the Mach-E, and we didn't find in any Tesla model until very recently. Heat pumps are considerably more efficient at heating the cabin. So in even mild weather, you can expect to spend 60 to 70% less energy heating this cabin than the cabin of the Mach-E. And that means that in a cold winter snowstorm, you may get better real-world range in this than a Mach-E rated for 250 or 260 miles of range. Unfortunately, there seems to be a lot of misinformation around about heat pumps and how effective they are at lower temperatures. Even below freezing, heat pumps are still going to be much more efficient than any other way of heating the cabin. They're always going to be more than 100% efficient until you get down to well below 0 Fahrenheit, temperatures that you will never experience in North America. But at those lower temperatures, sometimes obviously efficiency may be reduced and heat output may be reduced. So Subaru also gives us an electric cabin heater and a separate electric battery heater. So this will not only use the heat pump to heat the cabin and heat the battery, it will also use the extra heater element if you need even more heating than this system can provide. It's a little bit difficult to see, but yes, there is a full underbody battery protection shield, just as we find in most EVs, but obviously this one was designed with slightly more rugged operation in mind than we find in an ID.4 or a Mustang Mach-E. I have to be a little bit careful with this next one because this has not been confirmed by Subaru, but Toyota has said that their design mission with the BZ4X was to give you 90% battery capacity after 10 years of ownership. So if you're looking for an EV with long battery life and long battery life well into your ownership cycle, the Solterra should logically be on your shopping list. Because this shares so much of its battery pack and drive system design with the BZ4X, essentially all of it really, other than the software, this should have the same sort of battery life that we find in the BZ4X. And logically, it has a long standard battery warranty, just like we find in any modern EV. Also, if you're worried about battery lifetime, they have said that the 77.4 approximately kilowatt hours of battery pack, that is a gross capacity. It's not the usable capacity. When you take a look at the numbers, it appears that usable capacity is probably somewhere around 60, just over 60 kilowatt hours. So it's likely that Subaru is reserving a large portion of the battery in order to make sure that you always get the kind of range that you expect out of your Solterra. How this will age over time, only time will tell, but I would expect that this is going to be one of the better battery lifetimes available in this segment. Coupled with that, of course, is the slower charge rate that we find with this battery pack and the slower discharge rate as well. By not taking as much power as rapidly out of the battery or stuffing it back into the battery, you can extend battery lifetime. So that is the other side of the coin for the slow DC fast charge time. Acceleration is more than just horsepower and torque numbers. Remember that in an electric vehicle, manufacturers can decide when they want to ramp up full power. Do they want to give you all the horsepower and all the torque right away, or do they want to roll it on a little bit more slowly? And that's the big reason that acceleration time in this Solterra is 6.2 seconds, approximately 0 to 60, even though it has considerably less power than something like a Volkswagen ID.4 all-wheel drive. That is a little bit swifter than this, but the difference is not as large as you might think based on the power disparity between the two models. And that's simply because in this vehicle, Subaru decided to give you all 218 horsepower from about 23 or 24 miles an hour, And in the ID4, they chose not to roll that dial all the way up until you're hitting almost 40 miles an hour. So it's a much more gentle ramp all the way up to nearly 300 horsepower. And the result is that this feels an awful lot peppier than the paper numbers otherwise would appear. That's one of the reasons a lot of EV car companies, they're choosing not to show you the horsepower and torque numbers at all anymore. Thanks to the Solterra's lighter curb weight than a decent number of the competition, 4,500 pounds approximately for the model that I'm driving versus 5,000 pounds for some mainstream EVs, and the fact that we have more ground clearance, there's simply more ability to give us more suspension travel and give us better ride quality. If you're looking for a modern EV that won't knock your teeth out on rough pavement, this is exactly the kind of vehicle you should look for. A Mach-E, it's pretty firm, as is a Tesla Model Y. Ioniq 5 and an EV6, they're definitely a little less firm, but I don't think they're quite as cushy as the Solterra, and they're not going to give you the same kind of ground clearance as this model. The relatively lower amount of range that we find in the Solterra, coupled with the slower DC fast charging speeds, mean that if you want to take your EV further off the beaten path, you need to live closer to the off the beaten path than the average American likely does. If you're the kind of person that likes to go to national parks on the weekend, usually that means a road trip, and in this kind of EV, you would probably need to DC fast charge for 45 minutes to 50 minutes just about before you get to that national park in order to make sure that you have enough battery power for your off-road adventures. Last but not least, value is certainly a strong reason to buy the Solterra. Now keep in mind, I don't know official pricing just yet. It's not going to be released until about a month after I have filmed this video. But let's put this in perspective. A Volkswagen ID4 all-wheel drive starts just over $44,000. Currently, the least expensive Mach-E with all-wheel drive is going to start just over $46,000. And range figures are not too far off when we take a look at the Mach-E, this, and the ID4 all-wheel drive. The ID4 all-wheel drive is going to give you a little bit more range. This is pretty close to the Mach-E. Subaru has not been overly specific about the price tag, but I would not be surprised if this ended up right around $45,000 to maybe $47,000, somewhere in that price range. And at that point, this represents a really good deal in the EV space, especially if you want something that's a little bit more rough road capable than the average EV. Outside the Subaru and the closely related Toyota, you're going to be paying tens of thousands of dollars more for anything with more rugged road capability than this. Something like the F-150 Lightning, the Hummer EV, obviously a Rivian R1T, a Rivian R1S, etc. They're all going to be considerably more expensive than this. And that definitely puts this in a different category to the Ioniq, the EV6, the Mustang Mach-E, the ID4, and a lot of the other EVs that we're going to be seeing trickling out from mainline manufacturers soon, including Nissan, the Chrysler Group, etc. Be sure and let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. Check out the full review if you haven't already done so. Find me over at facebook.com, Instagram, all those other social places, and I'll see everybody a little bit later.